Okay, this is one of a couple short movies to accompany Chapter 8, The Heart and Blood Vessels. And in this one, we're going to start with the blood vessels. We'll go through the basics of blood vessel structure, talk a little bit about blood pressure, and then we'll talk about some conditions of blood vessels that are important for human health. There in the lower right-hand corner, there's a short or very small picture, kind of a diagram of a kind of a half section of a blood vessel showing blood cells moving in the blood vessel. And so let's jump right into it. There are three types of blood vessels: arteries, capillaries, and veins. Arteries and capillaries are quite similar in structure. They have kind of three layers. Their walls are made up of three layers. There's an outer layer of epithelium, then a middle layer of muscle and elastic tissue, and then another inner lining, this time also made up of epithelium. There are slight differences in the thickness of these layers, but arteries and veins are broadly similar. But capillaries are very different, and capillaries are really important, so let's jump right into capillary structure. So above there is a cross-section of a single capillary, kind of a three-dimensional section. And capillaries are very thin-walled blood vessels. In fact, the blood vessel's wall is only one cell thick, and it's a very thin cell. And this thin wall permits the exchange of materials between the blood and the tissues, the muscle cells or nerve cells that are just surrounding the blood vessel. Things like oxygen, carbon dioxide, nutrients, and lots of other molecules like hormones and various other things can move in and out of the blood vessels at the capillaries. And the capillaries are quite small, and virtually every cell in your body is only a fraction of a millimeter away from a capillary. And so these carry materials to and from all the tissues of the body. They bring the things that the cells need, and they take away the waste products. They bring molecules that help communication between one cell and another. It's really important. This is the business end of the circulatory system where this exchange occurs. It's really, really crucial. Okay, and you have more capillaries than any other blood vessels. Your tissues are just loaded with these small, tiny, tiny blood vessels. Okay, arteries are the blood vessels that bring blood to the capillaries from the heart. Blood in arteries is going pretty fast. It's under high pressure because it's coming from the heart, and the heart forces blood into the arteries so that those arteries will carry blood quite quickly to the tissue. Once the heart beats, within just a second or two, blood can go anywhere in the body. And so the arteries have thick walls, and those walls contain layers of muscle and of elastic tissue, and they can stretch or be contracted so that they can change the pressure of blood. And arteries will carry blood then from the heart to virtually every part of the body. And among the most important things that this does is it delivers oxygen to the tissues. And all the cells need oxygen to use energy. And so that's why the blood is moving quickly. Lots of arteries are going to be either elastic arteries, which means they can stretch a lot when blood pressure is high, or they're muscular, which means they can contract to get smaller or become dilated to get larger so that more blood flows in an area when it's dilated or less when it's constricted. And this allows the body to control the flow of blood to each organ. And that is really important because not all organs need blood at the same time. When you're active and running around, your muscles need blood, but your kidneys and digestive system don't. So the arteries that go to the kidneys and digestive system constrict, and less blood flows to those organs, while the arteries that are going to the muscles in your leg, those muscles dilate and the artery gets wide and more blood flows there. And this allows the body to deliver oxygen to where it's needed. And this kind of happens in a self-regulatory manner. Whenever we need blood in a specific organ, the that low concentration of oxygen at that organ and the increase in waste products kind of causes the arteries to dilate in part by themselves. Okay, the last type of blood vessel are veins. And just like arteries go to every part of the body, veins collect blood from every part of the body and they take it back to the lungs and back to the heart. And so these are always carrying blood to the heart, and it's moving at relatively low pressure. In fact, it's moving very slowly and so at such low pressure that sometimes it backs up. Like if you're sitting in the same position one time, blood can start backing up into your legs. Or if you're standing in one place, it can kind of go down into your feet. And so veins have valves, and these valves prevent the backflow of blood so that blood can always be moving towards the heart. And when the muscles around the valves contract, often that will force blood towards the heart. This is called muscular pumping. And this is why sitting is kind of bad for you and standing in the same place are kind of bad for you because it interferes with the circulation, the part of your circulation that brings blood back to the heart. And this is your veins. And so it's very hard on your veins to sit or stand in one position. Okay, and that's just because the blood is coming back to the heart through the capillaries. It's far from the heart, so what's forcing it is the heart, and that's far away, and so this is blood moving very, very slowly. Okay, this arteries, capillaries, and veins, this is strongly related to blood pressure. And blood pressure is just the force that the blood exerts on the walls of the arteries, capillaries, and veins. Blood pressure is highest near the heart because when the heart contracts, it forces a lot of blood into those arteries. And so each time the heart contracts, which is called systole, blood pressure spikes. It goes higher. When the heart relaxes, that's called diastole. And blood pressure, because those arteries are elastic, during diastolic pressure, blood pressure doesn't fall to zero, but it starts to get lower again. Okay, blood pressure is also affected by other factors. How smooth the arteries are, how relaxed the muscles in the artery walls are, how much blood is there. The volume of blood strongly affects blood pressure. And how thick the blood is, how much water's in it. Sometimes the blood gets very, very thick, and so it's harder to pump, and that causes blood pressure to rise. But blood pressure is one of these things, just like body temperature, that's related by or controlled by a negative feedback system. And this negative feedback system maintains blood pressure at about 120 millimeters of mercury in arteries, about 120 during systole and about 80 millimeters of mercury during diastole. And there's a part of the brain that's kind of getting information from pressure receptors in the walls of arteries and veins. And this comes back to a part of the brain called the vasomotor or cardiovascular center, which is in the brainstem, in the medulla oblongata. And the brainstem can decide if I need to cause blood vessels to dilate or constrict. And so it's always receiving information from these pressure receptors and from the heart and other things, and that helps regulate blood pressure. Okay, this brings us to one of the really important health conditions that's affected by the conditions of the arteries and the veins, and also in the other things that affect blood volume and blood thickness and resistance. That condition is called hypertension. And what hypertension means is that at rest, the pressure in the arteries is above normal, significantly above what it is in most people at rest. And so you have this high elevated resting blood pressure. And when we talk about hypertension, we often talk about something called risk factors. And we do this often because we don't know what causes it. We know that there are a bunch of risk factors associated with it, but that the exact cause is unknown, or maybe there are multiple causes. We know that people as they get older tend to have high elevated resting blood pressure. People with obesity have a higher risk of hypertension. Certain things in your diet, like high amounts of salt, has a tendency to cause some people to have hypertension. stress, other factors. We know all these things can cause people to have higher than normal elevated resting blood pressure. And if you have hypertension, you generally feel pretty much okay. For a long time, you won't have any symptoms, but this high resting blood pressure can cause complication. These complications are organs and structures that are damaged because of hypertension. And often over time, these can do great amounts of damage and lead to serious problems. Hypertension, not right away, but maybe after 10 or 20 years, is one of the leading causes of kidney damage, of blindness, of heart failure and heart attacks. And by heart failure, we're talking about failure on the left side or the right side. And so this is sometimes called congestive heart disease. And it's also damages the walls of arteries such that strokes are more common. This is all due to damage to small blood vessels that happens because these blood vessels are stretched more than they should be. Okay, so this is really a serious long-term problem. In the short term, it's not so bad, but in the long term, very serious. The other really, really important condition that you may have never heard the name, but you've probably heard something about it. This is called atherosclerosis. This too has risk factors, and many of the same risk factors that we have for hypertension, although the dietary factors are a little bit different. In the case of atherosclerosis, people develop what's called plaque in their arteries. This plaque is a deposit of fat, cholesterol. Sometimes there's some calcium in there, and there's a lot of signs of inflammation that occur. And this plaque starts as a small bump on the inside of the artery, but eventually it can almost totally block the middle part of the artery, what's called the lumen. Here, this picture to the right here, you see that most of the artery is blocked by plaque, and there's thickening of the lining of the artery. And instead of being a nice open tube, what you have is a really clogged up pipe. And this is really, really serious. Again, not in the beginning, but towards the end, after a significant period of time. Atherosclerosis and plaque is the leading cause of heart disease. It's also the leading cause of stroke. And together with hypertension, these things work together to probably produce more deaths in Americans than all other causes of death combined. Heart disease is the leading cause of death. Stroke is the third leading cause of death. These are due to atherosclerosis and hypertension, damaging and blocking the arteries. Okay, atherosclerosis can be treated. They can give you drugs to reduce the amount of cholesterol in your body, and that can gradually reduce the amount of plaque. They can go in there and clean the plaque out sometimes, or they can make a bypass around it. But if the reason for the buildup isn't addressed, the plaque can reform and cause a serious problem. So very, very serious. One of the most important disease processes in people in the United States and all over the world, not just in the United States. Okay, so we're going to stop there. To summarize, we want to just say that there are some special types of blood vessels, arteries, capillaries, and veins, and they're each specialized to do a specific job. Okay, in the arteries, capillaries, and veins, blood pressure varies. It's highest close to the heart, where the heart is pumping blood in there, and we can use a measurement of blood pressure to assess the condition of the heart and the blood vessels. So it's a very important condition. Blood pressure is controlled by a negative feedback system that is affecting both the arteries and veins as well as the heart, and that tends to maintain blood pressure in a normal range. This system of blood vessels is affected by two really important conditions: hypertension, which can lead to long-term complications that are very, very serious, and atherosclerosis, which directly kills more Americans than any other cause of disease. Okay, we'll stop there and look for tomorrow for a small program on the heart.